Ladies and gentlemen, it's a thrill for us and quite an honor to introduce our first guest this evening. Please welcome the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Wow.
I'll just say this. When I say the words, ladies and gentlemen, Barack Obama, President of the United States, and I look over, and it's you walking over here, I get a little, you know, kind of a thing. It's overwhelming.
Well, I feel kind of overwhelmed. I am so honored to be one of your last guests.
Now, let me ask you about that.
That's a big deal.
I was thinking about this today. Many days when I wake up and I find out what I have to do during the day, there's a couple of things where I say, oh, God. Now,
are you saying that's how you felt this morning? Well,
no, I'm saying
this.
No, but when
this interview isn't starting well.
It's fine.
I thought after
it will settle
all this
down.
time.
Don't worry. No.
Okay.
So when you are reminded that today is today, do you say to yourself, "Oh God, today is the day I have to go see Letterman"?
No, I'm excited about it. First of all, I know you like Michelle a little bit more than me.
Oh my God.
Which is okay.
She was here last week.
I know. And I assure you, you are not alone. But I'm not going to let her have all the fun. And mainly, I came by to say goodbye to Biff and Paul. Who, let's make.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Goodbye to you.
Thank you.
That's fine.
The band says goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. But they said I couldn't get on the set unless I also spoke to you.
Okay. Fair enough.
But I want to tell you, your wife, and I've met her, I don't know, 4 or 5 times in various circumstances. Last week she brought with her your own Marine Corps band.
Pretty cool.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And you're just seeing it. You can't, the hair on the back of your hand stands up when these men and women march in.
They're amazing. And I don't know if she mentioned it. First of all, these folks are all active duty. And they can play anything. Mm-hmm. You know, you want them to play jazz, they'll play jazz. They want them to play classical. Yo-Yo Ma came by the White House one time, and suddenly he sat down with them, and they were all playing cello suites. And I mean, you name it, they can play it. And in the meantime, they're also putting their life on the line. It is one of the great honors of the presidency to be their commander-in-chief.
Right. Well, to hear that kind of live music close to it is a remarkable thing.
Terrific.
And these are people in the Marine Corps for, they've made this a career?
Well, they made it a career, but as I said, they're not just playing music. They're serving in all kinds of ways.
And a guy in a huge bear skin hat brings them out.
He's serious, too.
The thing, yes.
Right.
And then they have a whole different conductor.
Yes, they do.
And these are the guys that
You were really paying attention. That's good, eh?
Man.
That's good.
I was.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, your wife was delightful, and man, just what a great asset to have for the representation of the administration, representation of women, representation of Americans.
She does great. She is. I'm lucky to have her. And you know, and I'm sure she talked about everything she's doing for military families, which has become such a passion for her. You know, we travel all around the world, and everywhere you go, you've got our members of the armed services stationed, and they are away from their families for months, in some cases years at a time. Sometimes the families are moving as well. The kids are adapting all the time to new circumstances, and they are great ambassadors for us. But part of Michelle's mission is to make sure that we're standing by them. Right. When they come home, we've got to make sure that they've got the kinds of benefits that they've earned, that their housing, child care, all those things are taken care of. And her and Joe Biden have done a great job on that.
It's an easy mistake. Yes, absolutely. It's an easy mistake to believe or to assume that once they come home and are no longer in uniform and defending our country, that their lives will be just fine again.
Well, and you know, we've got a lot more work to do. Because of the length of the Iraq War, the Afghan War, we've got well over 1 million people who are coming back. And they are incredibly talented. Part of our mission is to communicate to employers. If you want to get the job done right, hire a veteran, because they will do it
they come,
like nobody's business.
They're ready to go.
They're ready to go.
Ready to go. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue with the President of the United States, Barack Obama. Thank you. President of the United States, ladies and gentlemen. If you had been here 3 months ago or 4 months ago, we would have been talking about one thing or another. 6 months before that, something completely different. And it seems to be that each one of these is epic in its tragedy, obscenely tragic. And now the topic that has consumed us all for the last couple of months, for example, the situation in Baltimore. Right. But that's one of many situations we could be talking about here tonight. How do you feel about that? What can be done about that? What went wrong there? What continues to go wrong around the country? Why?
Well, first of all, it's important that now that charges have been brought in Baltimore, that we let due process play itself out. You know, those officers who've been charged, they deserve you know, to be represented and to let the legal system work its way through. We don't have all the facts yet, and that's going to be presented in a court of law. I think it's also really important to remember that the overwhelming majority of police officers are doing an outstanding job. We're in New York today. We're in New York today where a young officer lost his life doing his job, and you know, families, officers all across the country every day, they're wondering, is my loved one going to come home? And so they've got a really tough job. What we also know, though, is that for far too long, for decades, you have a situation in which too many communities don't have a relationship of trust with the police. And if you just have a handful of police who are not doing the right thing, that makes the job tougher for all the other police officers out there. It creates an environment in the community where they feel as if, rather than being protected and served, they're the targets of arbitrary arrests or stops. And so our job has to be to rebuild trust. And we put forward a task force made up of police officers, but also young activists who had been protesting in Ferguson or here in New York. They came up with some terrific recommendations about collecting data on what happens when there's a shooting involving police. What are we doing in terms of things like body cameras? And so there's some very practical, concrete things we can do to make the system work better. But, and this is something I reminded people of the other day, this is not just a policing problem. What you have are pockets of poverty, lack of opportunity, lack of education, all across this country. And too often we ignore those pockets until something happens. And then we act surprised, and the TV cameras come in. And essentially we put the police officers in a really tough spot where we say to them, just contain the problem. And so if young African-American men are being shot, but it's not affecting us, you know, we'll just kind of paper that over. And part of the message that I'm trying to deliver is, look, you've got a crisis in these communities that's been going on for years, where too many young people don't have hope, they don't see opportunity, there aren't enough jobs. We've created a an approach to drugs that leads to mass incarcerations. So then you have no father figures in these communities. When those folks get out of prison, they can't get a job because they got a felony record. So today, part of what I did in New York was to announce some additional initiatives around what we're calling My Brother's Keepers. How can we send a message to young people of color and minorities, particularly young men, saying your lives do matter, we do care about you, but we're going to invest in you before you have problems with the police, before there's the kind of crisis we see in Baltimore. We're going to make sure you got early childhood education. We're going to make sure that you have an opportunity to graduate and go to college, and you've got mentors and apprenticeships. And that kind of sustained effort, I think, is what we have to see in this country, not just the episodic spasms of interest when something tragic happens.
The conditions that, yeah. The conditions that you mentioned, poverty and lack of education affect all people. Right. Is that what creates racism? Is racism the factor, a residual factor?
You know, I think a residual factor, but also a buildup of our history. And we can't ignore that. Look, if you have slavery, Jim Crow, discrimination that built up over time, even if our society has made extraordinary strides, and I'm a testament to that, and my children are, my kids and your kids are growing up in America where the attitudes of the next generation make you hopeful, because I think they genuinely try to judge people much more on the basis of character.
Well,
but it's built up over time. So
yes.
if you have 100 years in which certain communities can only live in certain places, or the men in those communities can only get menial labor, or they can't start a particular trade because it's closed to them, or if they're trying to buy a house or a car, it's more expensive. And over time, that builds up. That results in communities where the kids who are born there are not going to have as good of a shot. And we don't have to sort of accuse everybody of racism today to acknowledge that that's part of our past. And if we want to get past that, then we got to make a little bit of an extra effort. And I think the vast majority of Americans are willing to do that if it's done well.
Well, I say this all the time. I remember the 60th anniversary of the March in Selma. Yeah. And when I hear about what seems to be a hate crime, a racist motivated crime, it's like when you hear about tuberculosis coming back, you think, no, wait a minute. Right. I thought that had been taken care of. And I have always thought that generations going forward would learn from what you described and be smarter about it and more aware about it and understand that, for the love of God, it's human beings, and that's all it is.
Well, I think that, Dave, I think that this country is leaps and bounds better than it was in a fairly recent past. I mean, when I was born, it was illegal in many states for my parents to marry. That's not institutionalized today. Some of the problems that we see in terms of law enforcement, that used to be the law. I mean, the notion that police would potentially be held into account, that was not at all what the custom was around the country, and in some cases not what it was on the books. But we have to be vigilant. It's like tending a garden. This country, our democracy, works because ordinary folks, well-meaning people, each and every day are trying to make it a little bit better. And we're teaching understanding to our kids. And when mistakes are made, we acknowledge them as opposed to trying to cover them up. And most importantly, in my mind, we think about not just our own kids, but we think about all kids. And when we say to ourselves that that child in Baltimore has tough circumstances, but that child is worth, in the eyes of God, just as much as my child, and we need to make sure we make an investment in them. When we get to that point, then not only does that child do better, but the country as a whole does better. And that requires the kind of sustained commitment that I'd like to see.
And irrespective of what we've come through recently, and it just seems like once a week there's something god-awful. Irrespective of that, you believe that race relations in this country are better, stronger?
I think that they are better. Part of what's happened is that we just know more today than we did. I mean, for example, this is a slightly different circumstance, but it sends, I think, a message about what we need to do. When it comes to things like sexual harassment or sexual assault or date rape, I don't think that it happens more frequently today than it did 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. Part of what's happening is we've become more aware of what women have been going through for generations. And so part of us fixing it is being aware of it. Well, a lot of the things that we've seen in Ferguson or New York or Baltimore have been going on a long time. We're more aware of it, in part because when you see something on video, it's a lot harder to deny. And communications have improved. And that's a good thing, because you know, the first step in curing any problem is being able to diagnose it and acknowledge it and not hide from it. And you know, we still have racism in our midst. We still have you know, problems of ignoring poverty in our midst. Kids are locked in situations where it's very hard for them to pull themselves out unless they get some help. And the more we're aware of it, we can solve it. The one thing I know about America is that when we decide to solve a problem, we can solve it. And this is solvable, and I think the vast majority of people want to solve it. But in order to do so, we can't just engage in a bunch of you know, rhetoric and engage in finger pointing. We have to come together and say, you know, what works and how are we going to make it better? And there's cities all across the country where police chiefs are working with activists and clergy and others, and they're saying, we want to get beyond this status quo, and I'm confident if we seize the moment, we can really see some serious improvement.
Let me ask you another question. Is this the first country you've presidented?
You know, it is, I suspect, the first and last country that I'm presidenting.
Right,
I am unlike late night talk show hosts. I am term limited.
Oh, wait a minute. We'll be right back with President Barack Obama. Here's, as you know, and as your wife has told you, most of everything I say is born of ignorance. And the free trade agreement, individually I know what those words mean. Together I have no idea. Help us out here.
Well, you know, 95% of the world's markets are outside the United States. We're you know, the biggest and most innovative economy, although just by sheer size and population, China obviously has caught up. But if we're going to succeed economically, then we've got to be able to sell our goods to other countries. We can't just sell here in the United States. And for the last 6.5 years, we've dug ourselves out of what was a terrible recession. The economy's growing faster than most of the other advanced countries in the world. But the next step is to make sure that our exports are going to places that are growing. And the big place where we're seeing a lot of growth is in Asia and in the Pacific region. So what we've done is to put together a trade deal with 11 other countries. And the objective is to have high standards so that our businesses and our workers aren't disadvantaged. Some of the past trade deals that hurt us, that led to a lot of manufacturing leaving the United States, was because we didn't have any enforceable strong labor standards. in these countries or environmental standards in these countries, so it was an uneven playing field. And they could make stuff real cheap.
Right.
They're polluting, they're employing child labor, and then they're selling back here, and our folks get undercut. The idea here is you lock them into higher standards, strong labor protections, banning child labor, making sure that they're not engaging in some of polluting activities.
So we then have legitimate competition.
And that way we've got an even playing field. Yeah. It's a fair playing field. And it's going to be important partly because, look, China's out there competing in these areas. And if we don't write the rules, they're going to be out there writing the rules. And studies have shown that when we enter into a trade agreement with other countries, our companies, they compete. They do well. When China enters into a free trade agreement with some of those countries, then, frankly, our companies are disadvantaged, and we end up getting the short end of the stick. So we've got to be in there. We can't just close ourselves off. And I know that in the past, sometimes people are suspicious of trade deals because they've seen communities that got devastated, plants closed, jobs left. And what I'm saying to folks is the lesson from that is to get the right kind of trade deal. It's not to think that we can somehow close off ourselves from the rest of the world, because we're going to have to compete. We got to sell out there, otherwise we're not going to be able to succeed.
It's interesting to me now, occasionally and more frequently, you will find something, you buy something, and it's proudly championed as having been made in the United States. And I think that's pretty telling as to how far things have shifted, that now that's something that we're heroic about.
Well, the good news is, and people don't know this, we're actually seeing companies move back. Manufacturing's been growing under my presidency faster than any time since the 90s. It's advanced manufacturing. So, you know, we're making the high-end stuff. Our workers are still better than anybody else's, and our innovation is still the best. But you know, we're not going to be able to compete on the low-end assembly stuff. There's always going to be lower wages somewhere, which is why we also have to make sure we're providing our kids the best education and training them to compete. Because what they need to be doing is you know, figuring out how to work a computer or a very complex piece of machinery to make advanced stuff as opposed to the low-end stuff. But we're succeeding at that, partly because we got great workers, we got great universities. This is also why we got to invest, though, in job training and research and development to keep our competitive edge.
And let me ask you about tangential to that, or essential to that, education in this country.
Yeah.
From talking to your wife and what I know outside, not where we want it to be.
Not to, we've got some great schools, and our universities are by far the best in the world. But too many of our kids are not up to the levels that we're seeing internationally. And you know, the first thing to do is to make sure we're honoring our teachers, treating them like the professionals that they are, paying them a decent salary. And we also have to look at the data, and it turns out that the kids who fall behind, typically it's because they're coming from households where there aren't as many books. You know, maybe their parents didn't have educational opportunity. And if we provide them early childhood education, it pays huge dividends all the way through. So we got to make sure that we focus on the earliest parts of school.
We'll be right back with the President of the United States, everybody.
What can I do, everybody? What can I do? There it goes, come on, rock, on and rock. There goes my baby. There goes my baby. I wanna know, yeah, does she love me?
I guess it's like 2 years plus till the election, and you don't have to really get in that melee. You will a bit here and there, but it must be relaxing to know that you're not out there on the front line. And second part, what will you do when you leave the White House?
Well, first of all, Dave, it is less than 2 years. Just the not that I'm counting. But I just want to make sure you don't show up like in the middle of January to vote, and everybody will be like, what happened? No, the election's in November of 2012. 16.
You think I'm dumb, don't you?
No, I didn't say that. You're distracted. You got stuff going on. Yeah, it does feel good not to have to be on the stump. The stakes are big, though, so I want to make sure that everybody's paying attention. It'll be a highly contested election, as every presidential election is, and you know, whatever your political affiliation, I just want to make sure you listen to what folks are saying, get informed on the issues, and then most importantly, go out there and vote.
What will you do when you're not president?
Well, I was thinking you and me, we could play some dominoes together. And,
Dominoes.
you know,
All right.
We can, you know, go to the local Starbucks and, you know, swap stories.
I want to say something that the president said to me during the commercial break that I was very impressed by. He said to me, "So when you retire, what are you planning?" He says, He says, like me. He says, "When I leave the office," he says, "I plan on taking a month off." I said, "Are you kidding me? After 8 years of this, you're only taking a month off?" Oh my goodness!
Well, you know, I'll be a pretty young guy when I get out of here. I mean, I'll be 55, and Malia will be in college, but Sasha will still have a couple of years left, and yeah, Michelle and I think, are going to continue to want to do the things that we care about in a different capacity. So we hope to be able to help young people get opportunity. We hope to continue to help our military families. You know, I hope that, you know, I'll be able, on issues like climate change that are generational challenges, to lend my voice, and most importantly, to encourage people to continue to get involved in politics. And but I really like the idea of playing some dominoes with you.
I play dominoes. I'm pretty good. I know you think I'm no good at dominoes, but I'm pretty good at dominoes. And I plan to teach law at Columbia.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. You know, I'd be interested in sitting in on that class. That would be a hoot.
Well, there you go. I mean, for heaven's sakes. I don't know quite what to say by expression of gratitude here. It's particularly meaningful to me because I think, like most Americans, we feel we know you. You've been kind enough to be here many occasions. Your wife has been here many occasions. And you hosted us at your home in Washington, D.C. And all of these have been very meaningful to me and to my family. And I can only wish you all the best in life.
Well, Dave, let me just say this, and I mean this sincerely. And I know I speak for Michelle. She probably had a chance to say it herself. You know, we've grown up with you. The country, I think, has, you know, after a tough day at the office or coming home from work, knowing you've been there to give us a little bit of joy, a little bit of laughter, it has meant so much. And you know, you're part of all of us. And so,
well, thank you
to
thank you very much.
but you've given us a great gift, and we love you.
You were very funny at the correspondence
I'm a pretty
dinner.
funny guy. I'm pretty funny because I learned watching you.
No.
So,
Now, do you have guys writing that stuff?
No.
No.
I came up with it all myself. I meant what I said. We love you, Dave.
I
we
love
really
you
do.
as well. God bless you, Mr. President. Thank you. President Barack Obama, ladies and gentlemen.